Hello, my name is Larissa Dameron and I'm a sophomore at Yale University. I'm interning with the Clare Luce Institute this summer, and while that is not in itself, I also have the distinct privilege in welcoming our next guest, a woman I've gotten to know very well through the Institute. Our next speaker is a maven of the publishing world, all while balancing work, play, and her wonderful family. Marji Ross is president of Regnery Publishing, the preeminent publisher of conservative books. She has been with Regnery since 1999, and in 2004 became the first person outside the Regnery family to hold the position of president and publisher. Under her leadership, Regnery has placed more than 75 books on the New York Times bestseller list, including 11 titles at #1. Prior to joining Regnery, Marji worked as a senior group publisher for Phillips International, a large newsletter publisher, where she ran several business units, including business, investment, and health newsletters. In her early career, she was a business editor and writer. Marji graduated from Dartmouth College with a Bachelor of the Arts in English and earned her Master's in Journalism from the American University in Washington, D.C. She serves on multiple boards, including for the Clare Boothe Policy Institute, and was awarded the Clare Boothe Policy Institute Woman of the Year in 2005. She expertly juggles all of this, along with being an amazing wife and mother. Marji and her husband have 3 beautiful daughters, and her success at balancing work, marriage, and family is what she's here to talk about today. Ladies, please join me in welcoming Miss Marji Ross.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. Nice to see you ladies here. Great event. I've been listening in a little bit before I got up here to the speakers, and you've got a ton of great advice already. So, day well spent. As you heard, I'm the president and publisher of Regnery Publishing. I am also the mother of Sarah, Trina, and Rebecca Ross, and the wife of Chuck Amante. Usually, when I get up in front of a crowd to speak, I just say, I'm president and publisher of Regnery, because that's usually the platform from which I'm speaking. And I give speeches on business and publishing and conservative politics and journalism and how to get your first job, best-selling authors. But today, I'd introduce myself listing all my jobs, because I actually have 3 full-time jobs: book publisher, wife, mother. And honestly, none of these is a part-time job. I think of them all as my job, because on some level I am doing all of those jobs all of the time. So my challenge today is to tell you how I do that, and hopefully give you some advice on how, as you go forward in your life and career, you might approach that challenge of balancing or combining your career and your family. So I will start at the beginning and tell you a little bit about my career path and my life. Graduated from college, set off to find my first job. And I knew that I liked writing, I liked editing, I liked publishing and communications. So I was looking for basically any job that had some little piece of any of those things. And I found a job as a writer for a small public relations firm in DC. So I was young, I was single, I was very determined, and I basically just worked harder than anyone else in the office. I just threw myself into my job. I didn't have a lot of family commitments, so I had plenty of time. I committed to learning everything I could about the field that I was in, and trying to get better at my job every day, which was not very tough at the beginning because I was not very good at it at the beginning. It was a new field and I didn't know what I was doing, but my goal was every single day I'm going to be a little bit better at this. And I really made a conscious decision to try to be, even if I was not the best person at it at first, to be the most productive person, to just work as hard as I could and literally produce as much work as I could. And I got better from practice, and I got noticed for working hard. I learned how to write a good press release, how to organize a press event, how to get media interested in a story. I learned a lot about business and Washington, D.C. And I also learned 2 very important things from my first boss. the owner of this small PR agency. She was a typical entrepreneur. She had started the business as a sole proprietor. She had grown it over 15 years or so into an 8-person firm with some very big corporate clients. And as I say, I learned 2 really important things from her in that very first job. First thing I learned was the importance of service. I remember seeing her, Suzanne was her name, at one of our big open house events. And this was an event for a very influential client. It was a grand opening of one of his new hotels. He was a developer. And we had a big crowd of people. There were caterers and photographers, lots of media. They're all bustling around this client. He's a pretty well-known businessman in Washington, D.C. He was the CEO of a big commercial development firm. And I remember my boss, Suzanne, she took his arm and she sort of steered him through the crowd of people right to the key reporter they really needed to talk to. And then she just almost seamlessly took his drink out of his hand, took his jacket off of his arm, and stood there and held them for him so that he could be talking to this reporter in the lobby. And at first, I thought, wow, that's really subservient. I mean, she's like his maid. She took his drink, she took his jacket. But that was completely wrong. I was wrong. And I realized that over time. What she had done was she had made herself indispensable to him. Katie talked about this. She had made herself so valuable to him that he relied on her for everything. She regularly gave him very sophisticated business advice, and he trusted her and relied on her because he knew that she would be there for him. And so what I originally thought was sort of subservient, making herself seem like she was at a lower status than he was, actually she was making herself indispensable to him by not being afraid to do whatever he needed to make himself successful, to get the job done. It was a really important lesson to me. I wanted to be just like her. I wanted to have the judgment to know what good communication strategy is, and because she always did. And I wanted to have that confidence that I could do whatever it took to make the person that I was working for successful and not feel embarrassed about it. In fact, feel proud that I was helping them do a better job. So in a way, what I learned was it's really a lot more important in your job to be valued by the other people you work with than, the public. A lot of people in journalism are all about getting the byline, getting the story. But in my career, what has been, frankly, the most valuable to me is being valued by the people around me that I work with and trying to figure out ways to help them and be valuable to them. And the funny thing is that when you're valued by the people that you are working with, you do end up being admired by the people, by the public, because you're part of a more successful endeavor, project, business, whatever it is. I learned one more thing working for her, and that was from noticing that there actually was something missing in her life. She was single, and she worked really hard all day, and then she went home to an empty, very beautiful condo in Georgetown. Actually, she went home to her little dog. It was a very cute little dog, but she didn't have she had a lot of friends, but she didn't have that life partner, that person to really share her joys, her sorrows, her triumphs, her disappointments. And over the years, I've thought a lot about that because I've known a lot of successful women. She was very successful, but the happy ones are the ones that are happily married. So I left this small public relations firm, and I became a junior editor at the Washington Business Journal, which was a great next job for me because I love business and investing journalism. So in the second job, I could take two pieces of things that I liked. And in my career, and I think in a lot of people's careers that I have known, the progression in your career is not necessarily a very linear one in terms of I did, I was the assistant editor, and then I was the editor, and then I was the managing editor. It's more a progression of doing more and more things in your job that are things you are good at and the things that you like to do, which are often the same thing. And by that I mean at first, in your first job, you're probably doing well if one of the things that you're doing is something that you're good at and you're passionate about. But embrace that, love that, and sort of look as you go through your career to start cobbling together a job or a career path where more and more of the time you spend at your job is spent on things that you like to do and you're good at doing. Because I know sort of do what you love sounds like a cliche, but I think if you approach it in that way, you actually can love, I'm not going to say any job you have, but most jobs have something in them that will appeal to you and that will play to your strengths. Maybe you love to write or edit, as I did. Maybe you love to work with people, or you like to work with numbers, like to solve problems or puzzles, organize things. Those are all things that are present in millions of different jobs and careers. So think about the tasks that you're good at and the skills that you have, and then realize that there are a lot of different jobs you can have, especially at the beginning of your career, that include some of those things. Basically, in my opinion, any job that you can think of, whether it's being the waitress or the restaurant owner, whether it's being the administrative assistant or the chief executive officer, you can find ways to pursue things that you love in your career and in each job. So my next job was as an editor for of the newsletter of the American Institute of Architects. And now this was a great job because I discovered the world of newsletters, and I also got to sort of run a publication. It was a little tiny publication, but it's amazing that they let somebody 25 years old run it, but they did. So this gave me a chance of sort of organizing a whole publication and feeling a sense of ownership for something, every 3 weeks. It's a very weird publishing schedule. Every 3 weeks when it went to print. And the other thing that I realized is that a lot of times you get into a job and you discover how much you like it, and it's a job or a career you've never even heard of. I didn't know anything about the newsletter publishing world. I didn't even really know there was a whole field of newsletter publishing, but because I like writing and editing and publishing and organizing, I looked for those things in a job, and lo and behold, I ended up in newsletters and found out that that was a really fun way to do all of those things that I like to do. And all this time, I was single. I had friends and family supporting me. I had boyfriends along the way, a few serious relationships, but I hadn't found the person yet that I wanted to marry. That changed in my next job when I went to work for Tom Phillips at Phillips Publishing. And once again, I got to combine a lot of things that I liked doing. So I was editing newsletters. They were financial and investment newsletters. And one of the people who interviewed me for that job wound up being my husband, my first husband. But I'll get to that later. I didn't go to this job looking for a husband. And I didn't know when I was interviewing with Marji Ross that we would ultimately fall in love and get married. But I did know that I loved what I was doing. I was getting closer to my dream job. A bigger portion of what I was doing was what I wanted to do. But then I also knew that someday I really wanted to get married and have children, have a family. But I approached this job the same way that I had approached each of my previous jobs. I looked for what I love to do, and I committed to being the hardest working, most productive person around. And I kept those other lessons that I had learned in mind, lessons about service and support. Don't be afraid to be supporting someone else, about gaining the respect of the people you work with, not worrying about, the public, or fame and fortune. But as I was working and learning and getting better at this job, I got to know this colleague who was already very good at his job, and he was willing to help me with mine. and we enjoyed each other's company, we respected each other's intelligence and skills. We discovered we had a lot of things in common. We shared a lot of the same interests and values and dreams. And much like Emma in the Jane Austen novel, I discovered one day that the person I loved was the person who had become my best friend. So I'm going to pause for a commercial announcement. Speaking of Jane Austen, a couple years ago we published a book called The Jane Austen Guide to Happily Ever After. And I sort of stole my speech title a little bit from the title of that book, although note for future publishers, titles cannot be copywritten, so you can steal any title you want. But I mention this book because it's probably the single best book that I know of for providing insight into what makes a good marriage, what makes a good match. So it's called The Jane Austen Guide to Happily Ever After. And like my story, I think it rejects the myth that finding someone compatible and appropriate is not romantic. On the contrary, I think it can be the most romantic path possible, and one that's much more likely to lead you to true happiness, which is another topic we'll come back to in a minute. So I was working as this newsletter editor and then a group publisher for 13 years at Phillips Publishing. And I went from assistant managing editor to senior group publisher, and I went from single Margie Grant to married Marji Ross with 3 daughters. And, there were a few keys, I think, to my success at that time, which I'll share with you real quick. First of all, I was really lucky to be working for a company that values family. And again, sounds like hard to do. Go find a company that values family. But it's actually easier than you think. And it's pretty easy to tell when you start working for a company whether or not they do value family. And that can make a huge difference in your life and the ability to work and have a family at the same time. I didn't actually take off a lot of time for maternity leave when I had my daughters, but the company was really flexible in allowing me to spend time with my kids when I needed to be there and when they needed me to be there. Not every day, not every hour. There are definitely trade-offs, and I'm sure there are times when my daughters would have liked me to be there and I wasn't there. But I was often able to adjust my schedule to my daughters. And a lot of that flexibility was something that I earned, and that I think you can earn in a lot of careers. I worked really hard, and I always got my work done. And I think as you go along in your career, as you prove to people that you are able to do that and that you use your time well, when you go to them and ask for some flexibility, you often can get it because they value your work and your dedication so much. Part of it also depends on what kind of job you have. My sister is a midwife, and somebody goes into labor, she has to be there. She cannot schedule around someone else's delivery. But her job, she works on different shifts, and so she knows when she's going to be there, and she knows when she's not, and she can schedule her time that way. And she has 2 daughters, very devoted to them, and she gets to spend a lot of time with them. So you can find flexibility in different jobs in different ways, I think. The other secret to my ability to both grow my career and my family at the same time was having the right husband. So that's my next tip. Find the right husband. Again, it sounds difficult, impossible, but it's not. My husband, this is my definition of what the right husband was. My husband wanted children as much as I did, so we shared that. And whether you do or you don't, the important thing is to share kind of your vision of your future life together. So he wanted children as much as I did, and he was very committed to being involved in their lives. He didn't hesitate at any role, changing diapers, driving forgotten homework to school. Take a note, you'll do that all the time. Chaperoning field trips, going to school plays, going to soccer games, going to concerts. His devotion to our family was an essential part of our happiness. And then, when I was 46 and my daughters were 16, 14, and 9, he died. And it was shocking. It was very sad. I felt many things. I remember feeling often at the very beginning like a planet that had been sort of thrown out of orbit, that the things that kept my world connected and ordered were gone. My daughters saved me. They wrapped their love around me. We came together as a family and we faced our future life without him. And I learned several more things. I learned the amazing kindness and selflessness of other people. I had hoped that was true, but I always defined myself as not a needy person, so I didn't really think I needed it to be true. But and I'd never really experienced that, anything like that before. But it was amazing. It was overwhelming to me how kind and selfless people were. I also learned the importance of keeping busy and being surrounded by people. For me, that was a therapeutic thing to do. And I also learned or relearned the value of service, which was so interesting to me. That again, those things that I sort of noticed at the very beginning of my career came back to me, because in this sense, this time, service wasn't a way to advance my career, but it was the single best way I ever found to recover from grief, to help other people. I tell my daughters that all the time. And so I, a little bit crazily, dove into volunteering, and within a year I was on 4 different boards, and I was volunteering to help with my alumni group, and with my congregation, and with this wonderful organization, Clare, Boothe. So I have to go back a bit and just catch you up on my career during this time, because a few years before my husband died, I had made the move from Phillips Publishing to Regnery, and that was a move from newsletters to books. So now I had actually called my dream job, certainly for someone who grew up loving books and loving to read. The idea of becoming the president and publisher of one of the most prestigious and influential independent book publishers in the country is a dream job. But it's a big job. It's a demanding job. It's an all-encompassing job. So how do I do that job and my other full-time jobs of wife and mother? To be honest, I think I did the mother part better than the wife part for a long time. I adore my 3 daughters. Anyone who spends more than 5 minutes with me knows I talk about them all the time. They're amazing people. They're smart, they're funny, they're kind, they're generous, they're thoughtful. And from very early on, I treated them as amazing people. And I had very high expectations for them, extremely high. And I didn't set those high expectations to stress them out, though I may have done that on occasion, but because I truly expected them to be outstanding, to be extraordinary, to be great. And I realize that sounds like a lot of pressure, but I've talked to my daughters about that a lot, and we often joke about it, and they tease me about it, but I think they know that my high expectations of them are an expression of my extremely high opinion of them. And so that's one of my approaches to motherhood, having very high expectations and understanding, of course, that they don't always succeed, they won't always excel, but they know I believe in them, and they always try to do well and to do the right thing. Basically, I have great confidence in them, not to be perfect, but to do their best. And there are 2 other things I think I've done as a mother that helped me combine work and family successfully. First of all, I always have involved my daughters in my job. And I talk about work, I explain what I do, I share stories about authors and book events, and I bring home jackets when we're trying to choose which book cover we should use for a particular book. I ask their opinion on titles and concepts and story ideas. And so now they like going into bookstores for years. They've gone into bookstores looking for Regnery books, finding them on the lower shelf, putting them up on the upper shelf, putting the other books down underneath. And they talk about what I do with their friends, mostly with their female friends, which is really interesting. And they pay attention to current events and politics. At first because it was important to my job, but now because they appreciate how important it is in their lives and in the world. And I take their advice. I listen to what they say. I value their opinion, and they know that. When I was a kid, a large part of my happiness, and this may sound familiar to you, I hope it does, was knowing that my mom thought I was great, right? And I just was certain that I just felt that. And when I was pregnant with my first child, I remember thinking, what if I don't feel that way? Like, what if I have a daughter or a son? I didn't know what I was having, and I just don't feel, I'm just not positive that they're terrific. How does that happen? How do they prove it? But I can tell you that, honestly, I believe that is the grace of God. I do. As soon as I held each daughter, I was positive she was amazing. And maybe because I felt that way, she was. Now, it doesn't mean there are never times when I argue with my daughters. My middle daughter, Trina, is a true perfectionist. And I know this because she said to me one day, this is so great, she said, you know, Mom, people say I'm a perfectionist, but I know I'm not because just look at all the things I do that aren't perfect. Okay, so they didn't say you were perfect. They said you were a perfectionist. That's actually the definition of a perfectionist. And so that's led to some, headbutters that we've had, like the time she yelled at me for putting her clothes from the washer into the dryer because she didn't want help. And so I took the wet clothes, out of the dryer and went outside and dumped them on our front lawn. Do your laundry yourself. Now, that is not a suggestion on how to be a great mom. It's just a reminder that happiness isn't perfect. The other thing I tried to teach my daughters was how to interact with adults. And I've always stressed the importance with them, and I encourage you when you have children to do the same, to the importance of looking adults in the eyes when you talk to them, of speaking clearly when you ask a question, of listening politely and sincerely, and of taking adults seriously. And this has served them very well in life. It's a gift you give your children when you teach them how to do that in school and social settings. They've often told me how valuable that is, how other parents notice, and I think that has helped them in their lives feel confident and be more successful. When people ask me how I balance my job and my family life, I really tell them that I don't think of it as a balance. I think of it as a blend. I don't treat those things as separate parts of my life. I actually think of it as one big stew where I throw everything into the pot and it all somehow works together. I just try to make sure that my life is broadly including all of those things. But, as I said, for a long time, I was more focused on being a good mother than being a good wife. And I don't think I asked myself, what does it mean to be a good wife? I think in pop culture, we're not encouraged to ask that question. In fact, I think it's interesting that pop culture now, it's kind of cool to be a mother, and any magazine you open up, People or Us Weekly or whatever, you see lots of famous actresses, princesses, with babies, right, or pregnant. You see them all the time. And a lot of times, actually, you'll see the men, actor, famous celebrities with kids. But there is very little discussion, support of, pictures of the married couple. It's sort of like being a mother is really PC, but being a good wife is still kind of unfashionable and vaguely embarrassing. When my first husband got sick, I found myself thinking a lot about that. What does it mean to be a good wife? And I don't really just mean, in sickness and in health, but the whole question of support and service to your husband, and of celebrating the amazingness of my husband the way I did my daughters, of caring more about his happiness than my own. Because I absolutely, and I think a lot of parents, most, I hope, parents care more about their kids' happiness or more worried about their kids' happiness than their own, but I'm not sure that's true about their spouse. In my job as president of Regnery, I get lots of recognition. I work with big celebrities and influential politicians. It's wonderful. It's really fun. But the person who has my back, who cheers for me when I have a big bestseller and also when I have a flop, is my husband. And when you find the right husband, you have to take the responsibility of being a good wife. Remember to cheer for him, too. To ask yourself, what makes him happy? What makes him feel important? What makes him feel proud of himself? And make sure that he knows you think he's amazing. About 5 years ago, I began to think about dating again. And I knew I didn't want to live the rest of my life single. I don't really like being alone. And my first husband gave me many things, including he gave me an amazing gift of telling me when he was very, very sick that he didn't want me to live my life alone. He wanted me to find somebody if I needed to do that. I know women whose husbands have died, and those husbands never told their wives that, and it's a really difficult thing. There's a sense of guilt that you can have over that. So it's an amazing gift that he gave me. And so eventually I did meet someone new, and I married my current husband, whose name is Chuck. And in many ways, he's very different from my first husband, but in a few essential ways, he's not. He's very smart. He's very articulate. He loves language and books. He's conservative. And he's also very, very generous with his love. And he's very proud of what I do, which is kind of fun. So he joins me in getting excited about books and authors. He listens to me complain when I face a problem, and he counsels me to be my patient, better self. I've been very fortunate. I know a lot of my success has been the happy accident of good timing, but being successful is not the same thing as being happy. And too many women, and men for that matter, chase, especially in this town, chase after success and leave happiness behind. So the title of my speech, Happily Ever After, combining work, marriage, and kids successfully, is pretty ambitious. I want you to have it all, to be successful and happy. And I think there are many paths to happiness. I've shared with you mine, certainly not the only way. You all have to find your own path. All I can tell you is I think the following things, which I'll just recap, might be helpful as you try to do that. So number one, remember that service is not subservient. Number two, be the hardest working person in the room. Number three, do what you love, no matter what job you have. Find the thing in that job that you love. Number four, choose a good husband and work hard at being a good wife. Number five, make sure the people you love know that you think they are amazing. Number 6. Remember that life is a stew, and you can combine work and marriage and kids together rather than trying to have different pieces of your life. And number 7, maybe most importantly, remember that success is not necessarily happiness, but happiness is success. Thank you very much. If anyone has questions, really about anything, I can talk about books, authors, although there's some stories I can't tell you, or work.
Hi, my name is Anna Aguilar. I'm working for Senator Cassidy. I actually have a question more about your career path because I share a similar dream career in book publishing. What did you do immediately out of college to help get you into the industry?
Well, a couple things. After I graduated from Dartmouth, I went on to get a master's in journalism. And mostly I did that because, number one, I liked the idea of coming to Washington and being in a program where you actually did train for a job rather than the sort of ivory tower education that I had and loved, but in my undergraduate. And so both that program and what I did in my early career was I wrote a lot. And I tell people that anyone who's interested in going into any kind of publishing or journalism career, it's really important to write a lot. It is not important, as Katie said, it's not important to get paid for it at the beginning. It's important to build up your portfolio of writing. And so look for every opportunity to write. First of all, you get better at it. And second of all, when you go to try to convince someone to hire you to write or edit, the more things that you've had that have been written, that have been published, the better off you'll be. And a lot of people, in their first job, don't have a big portfolio to show. So I would just be creative and persistent about looking for ways to write a lot and build up that portfolio.
Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? Yes.
1 second.
Here it comes.
Hello. My name is Ashley Cook, and I'm currently interning for Media DC, so I do a lot of public relations. And you really spoke to me when you said that you were always trying to be productive in the beginning before you met your husband, and you always wanted to be working, and that's very much who I am. There's never an off button. So did you ever stop and question if you would find someone, a significant other? Did you ever think that your work was hindering that? Did anyone criticize you for it?
Yes. Yes and yes and yes. I did worry about it. I did have other people wondering. I questioned it myself, and of course my mother was asking me all the time. So a couple thoughts. One is, I think a lot of people meet somebody at work. If you work a lot, chances are you're working with people that are interested in the same thing, share your values. But also, I think it is healthy to have a couple of extracurricular activities. So one of the best ways to meet somebody that you might be compatible with is church. You can meet someone in your church or congregation. And then if there's just one thing you like to do, I like to sing, so I joined a chorale, and that was a fun way to meet people. So I think, it's interesting, for a long time I thought, oh God, I don't have to do that. And you do, I actually do believe that if you want something done, give it to a busy person. I think you can make time in some ways for more than you think. So it doesn't have to be a lot of things, but choose one that you say, okay, this is something I'm going to do for me, and you, because you're doing something you enjoy, whether it's a volunteer activity or being involved in your church or being involved in some other, community event, another great way to meet a good husband is volunteering for a campaign. So, that's not the reason to volunteer, but it's just a side note. But really, one thing that you are really passionate about is a great way to have fun, to have a little bit of stress relief from constant working, and also to meet people that share your interests and your worldview.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes, great.
Hi, thank you
Hi.
so much for those interesting stories. My name is Dominique, and I'm interning at the Regnery building in procurement and acquisition.
Okay.
And I just wanted to ask you a question, kind of piggyback off of what Ashley was asking. Was there a panel or an infinite moment where you were like, this is my husband, he's
That is a great question. No, there wasn't. And I'll tell you what, my current husband, it has a theory that men are the true romantics, and that women are actually think that they're more romantic, but the secret is that men are the true romantics, and that women are actually much more practical, and of course we get a lot more done, so I agree with that part. So I think actually a lot of times men are the ones who, a lot of times, they will never admit it, but they're the ones who actually start thinking this might be the right person. I'm serious, before you do. To me, I always, for my whole life, I wanted to be really good friends with whoever I spent my life with. So it started as a friendship, and then grew into a love. But it's okay if you actually figure out who it is first before he does. Other questions? All right, ladies, thank you very much.